Today we'll be installing new front rotors and pads on the 986. I have some Paget rotors here and some Power Stop Z26 pads. Now these are a little bit more aggressive. They should be just fine for autocross. If I was going to be doing some track days, I probably would have gotten a more expensive pad, but we'll see how these do. I'll have my review at the end of this video. So I decided to knock this side out first and figure out how to do everything. So on the other side, I'll give you guys a step-by-step guide and call out any differences, which there should be no differences between these two sides. One thing to call out up front here is that when you're compressing these pistons back in, you're pushing brake fluid back into the system and you could overflow this. So what I like to do, I like to take this cap off to relieve that pressure, make it a little bit easier to push the piston back in. And I like to put a rag around this in case when I push those pistons back in, any fluid comes out. And now that I've done the other side, I can tell you guys this is a super easy brake job. There's nothing too tricky about this. What might hang you up is if you strip out these screws here. So I'm using this little punch tool. When you hit it from the back here, it rotates. So you put this in these Phillip head here, and then you whack the back, and when you start to see it turn, that means it's loose. It's starting to turn there, just like that, broke loose. I like to break these loose before I take the caliper off. It can help just hold things in place a little bit here. So let's make sure this is set here. Get this in here again. Another thing you can do if that tool is not working for you, I like to do a 1/4 bit with a Phillips head that fits right in there on a wrench. This gives you enough leverage, and you actually have to put a lot of pressure into it and hold this rotor from turning. And I was able to get it to crack loose with that when this wasn't doing the trick. Now this tool that I have, you can see it's kind of sideways here. It's a little bit cheaper. Probably should get a better quality one, but it just wasn't doing it. It started to look like it was stripping out. So when I switched to this, it got the job done. Now that we have these screws broken loose, we can take off the bolts for the caliper. So we have a bolt up there and then one down here. It's a 10mm hex. Get your breaker bar out, as these are usually in there nice and tight. Have the 10mm hex on the breaker bar here. Get this situated in here. Let's see how tight these are. Actually not too bad. Let's see how this bottom one is. Not too bad. Before we take these guys all the way out, we have to remove one more bolt over here. So this bolt holds on the brake line to the hub. So to swing the caliper out of the way of the rotor, you have to take off that 10mm bolt right there. Now that we have these two screws loose, we can take out this rod here. There's a small clip on the back here that you have to pull out, and then use a punch tool and a hammer to drive this rod out the backside here, and that will allow you to take out this clip and the pads. What you can do to help you slide these pads out is take them and just lean back to push in those pistons. Take your thumbs here, just push those in. You can also take something in here to wedge in and just carefully pry these guys back to push in those pistons. All you're trying to do is get enough room in here to move these pads around. So now that we have that rod out of the way, I'm not able to get these brake pads to come loose. On the other side they did, but I'm going to take this caliper all the way off so it just has these bolts holding it in place loosely. We're going to use some wire to tie it up here, and that should give us enough space to be able to get these pads out. All right, got the pads out. In between the pad and the caliper pistons, you might find what they call dampers, and this helps cut down brake squeal and brake noise. These aren't 100% necessary, so mine are in pretty rough shape. Don't feel like reusing them, so we're gonna toss them. I'm actually gonna be reusing the wear sensors So if your wear sensors haven't been hit yet, so if the pads aren't worn down to the sensors, you can see here there's a hole and a little notch where they go. So if you have pad left in front of them, technically you can reuse these sensors. It's a little bit tricky to get them out of here, and you have to make sure that they clip in nicely to the new pads. If they're worn out enough or you damage them pulling out, you shouldn't reuse them. You should just replace them. It's really not difficult to replace them, and they're not expensive. So if you're worried about it, I'd recommend picking up a set before you do the job. All right, with the old brake pads off, caliper out of the way, we can pull this rotor off. Just gotta pull these screws all the way out, disconnect the spacer on this car. Once we take these off, the spacer comes off, and then we can throw on the new rotor. Have the new rotor on with the spacer and these two bolts in place. Now these rotors are directional. So the way that these rotors are set up, it looks like the fins are going backwards towards the back of the car. Now, I would recommend looking up for the rotors you have, what direction they are, what side they should go on. Look at your part numbers, and you should be able to figure out which side they should go on. All right, now for getting the pads back in place and the caliper on. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use our hands to compress these pistons here. Now, what I mentioned before about the cylinder here is keep an eye out for the fluid overflowing as you're compressing these pistons in. You should be able to just take your hands in here and start to squeeze them slowly back in place to make room for the new brake pads. You can use your thumbs here, press these in. It's moving for me. And just go around and compress all four until they're just about flush. All right, the pistons are pushed back in, so we're gonna get this thing unhooked from here and positioned so that it can go back on. Sure, there's a torque spec for these. I'm just gonna do them nice and tight. All right, before we put these pads in, we're gonna use some high temp brake grease and put grease on the back of these pads. This is where the piston on the caliper contacts. We will also be putting some grease on the inside of this as this thing contacts here on the pad, and the pad will be moving back and forth. Actually, more like this. The pad will be moving back and forth, and you want it to be able to slide on this. All right, you can put your pads back in now that they're all greased up. If your calipers are pushed in far enough, they should slide right in. Just like that. Okay, now we'll take this clip here, greased up the inside. On the grease, don't go overboard with it. You don't need too much grease on these, just a light coating. So we'll get this guy pushed in here. Make sure that your clip is actually at the bottom, because that holds in the wear sensors. We'll get this guy positioned here, and then find your pin. Here, it's not a bad idea to clean this thing up a little bit. You can put a little bit of grease or whatever is on your fingers here. When you're sliding in, try to keep this hole here outward so that you can get that small pin back in place. So this side goes in first. This side without the taper goes in last. And you just slide it in from the back, position it through the brake pad, and then over the top of this clip here. And what you can do is you can take a hammer and just tap on the back here, try to get this thing to push through. All right, when it's just about flush with the end here, it'll still be sticking out the back, but it's all the way in then, and you can put the small clip back in that hole. To get these wear sensors back in, you have to line up this with the hole on the inside, get it into place, and then you should be able to click it down into the pad like that to where it's locked in. Make sure you line up the wear sensor wire underneath this clip, and then back here through the through this notch in the caliper. Then don't forget to put on that 10mm bolt back here holding this line in place. All right, that's it. Everything's back together, brake pads in place, pins on here. These bolts are tightened down, these are tightened down. Everything's good to go here. So both sides are the exact same. You don't have to worry about any differences here. So now what you need to do is drive the car around and bed in the brakes. It's a pretty simple process. Drive around, hit the brakes pretty hard, from like 30 miles an hour, 40, 50. Try not to come to a complete stop. And what you're trying to do is just spread around the pad material onto the rotors, get everything nice and bedded in evenly. So do that, don't come to a stop, drive around a little bit, let them cool off afterwards, and then you're good to go. Make sure your brake fluid is at the correct level. After pushing in those pistons, it might be a little bit high. Just take a look up here in this reservoir. There's a level check right here. You can see the fluid. I'm right at max, so I'm in good shape here. All right, let's get this wheel back on. I'm gonna go for a drive, get these brakes bedded in, and then I'll let you guys know what my initial impressions are of these pads and these rotors. All right, so I went for a drive in the Boxster to test out the new brakes, and I wasn't really impressed. So got the padded rotors, which are fine, but the PowerStop Z26 brake pads just didn't feel like they had enough stopping power. It was about what I had before with the old pads, and it feels like it's lacking something. So I picked up some EBC Yellow Stuff pads. Got the front and rears here. And these are track pads, street and track pads, but they're supposed to improve the stopping power a little bit, a little more aggressive. So we're gonna replace both the front and the rear now and see if that makes a difference. So let's get the car shuffled around here, get the Boxster in the middle so we can jack it up and swap out these pads. Have the EBC yellows on the car, both front and rear now. So I'm gonna go for a drive, break them in, and see if they're actually better than the pads that I had on here before. All right, the EBC pads are pretty good. Went for a drive. It's definitely an improvement over the pads that I had on previously. So I'm happy with the upgrade. I think I'll do the fluid next. We'll do a pressure bleed with some higher temp fluid in there. Then this thing should be pretty well sorted out with the brakes. I think what's next with this car is sorting some things out with the suspension. One thing that I noticed on the rear, the bump stops are pretty much gone on the rear. So I think I have to pull those apart, replace the bump stops. I'm gonna do some of the control arms on this thing, just freshen some things up a little bit. I don't think I'm gonna swap out the coilovers. I was considering Öhlins on the coilovers, but seems like a waste of money considering I have pretty fresh Bilsteins and H&R springs on here. All right, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching.